Hello everybody, welcome back. And today we're going to be discussing EU4 multiplayer, single player tier list for starting nations, the most commonly played nations within EU4. Multiplayer primarily, but I'll throw a little bit of single player in here. This will take into account ideas, mission trees, their starting position, the probability of their diplomacy being successful, their neighbors, and kind of their general strategy, I guess you could say. So let's get started right away. First, we have Brunswick. Now, Brunswick's an interesting pick in multiplayer. Keep in mind the majority of these are going to be European powers. It's not necessarily that you can't be successful as a non-European in EU4. You'll see strong Persias in competitive games and stuff like that. But you're not usually going to see a Mali or a Kilwa being number one. So um, back to Brunswick. Brunswick is a unique pick because you can either form Hanover or Westphalia. I personally prefer Westphalia's ideas. Um, you have the idea cost and the 5% discipline. Westphalia is a really great formable. It's not as good as Hanover in single player because um, Hanover can get the personal union on England, which is pretty strong. But in multiplayer, that is an unrealistic scenario, getting a personal union on a player. Um, so, Brunswick. Their ideas are you've got state maintenance in there, you've got a little bit of discipline, but to be honest, compared to your surrounding neighbors, because most of the time you're going to have a Lübeck, Brandenburg, Cologne, um, and Bavaria, and then of course Denmark and the Netherlands. So you're kind of surrounded. And I feel like out of their neighbors, they definitely have the worst ideas to rock with. If you can survive it, and then you could form Westphalia, then you're in the green. But to start, I'd say that they're one of the weaker German starting tags. So for that reason, I'll give them a D, and then we'll adjust if need be. Second is Aragon. Aragon's pretty interesting because Aragon is kind of like the unlikely formable for Iberia. Castile is obviously a much more popular pick. I would say that Aragon's much more of a Eurocentric starter or starting nation. You're not really super focused on colonies. Really dig into North Africa. However, I would say that Castile is much stronger than the Morocco player right at the start. So Aragon has some issues there. They can go Peasant Republic, added recently in the Domination DLC. Kind of funny. But personally, I wouldn't say that it's better than Castile. You do have your Mall of Armies and such. They're definitely more naval focused, and you have to worry about France wrecking you. And I don't reckon your chances against France in a competitive multiplayer game right at the start. You're gonna have to indebt yourself really heavily or rely on allies like Portugal or North Italian states. So while Aragon's not necessarily bad, they're fun in single player. They're not necessarily an excellent choice for multiplayer when Castile is an option. So uh, I'd say that they're definitely better than Brunswick, and like I said, we can adjust. Venice, on the other hand, Venice is, from my personal experience, Venice is sometimes banned in competitive MP because Venice is really strong. Their eco can scale incredibly, especially early game. Solid navy, so people aren't going to get the war score necessary to really do a super damaging peace deal on you. I mean, you can always build up a navy, but Venice is certainly has a proclivity to their whole naval thing with the galley combat ability, sailors, marines. They can be a tough cookie to crack. Um, I would say that they are definitely one of the main contenders to form Italy. However, the only reason why I wouldn't put them in, say, A tier is because Venice has quite a few enemies. So, like I said, if you're playing a traditional, 20, 30 player competitive MP game, you got to deal with an Austria, which can be really taxing on even your amazing economy. Having Milan right next to you is a problem, trying to get their cores back. And then, of course, you have the Ottomans who seek to take your islands, which isn't too much of a problem because of your navy. But to be honest, just the fact that they have so many early game enemies and people that are trying to strip away their really, really good trade is probably puts them in B tier. Also, they're lacking some of those like really nice military buffs. Not having the morale of armies or discipline is one reason why the original meta was to form Dalmatia as Venice, but it's kind of fallen off because people realize that to form Dalmatia, you kind of have to screw yourself over and give away land, because I believe that the requirement to form Dalmatia is have less than 10 cities. So next, Ulm, obviously S tier. No, Ulm is it's I would say it's definitely the best nation to form Swabia. Swabia has pretty decent ideas with the 15% morale of armies can be really solid when combined with defensive ideas. However, similar to Brunswick, they sort of run into trouble when it comes to their neighbors and people just having better ideas. Uh, they're pretty lackluster in terms of their army quality. I think the only military buff they get, if I'm not mistaken, is like +1 land leader maneuver, which is a funny bonus. And of course, this nation is kind of a meme nation. But I'd say Brunswick is still better. um, I don't know if I put it in D though. Honestly, maybe these should all be C's. We'll try that. We can always fix it. Tunis. Tunis is a solid B. Tunis has the ability to raid coasts, which really allows you to propel yourself early game if you're trying to help the Morocco player fight the Spanish, or pushing into southern Italy, Sicily, that sort of stuff. They have a pretty solid navy. Their army quality isn't necessarily the best, but just their ability to consolidate the Maghreb region really, really quickly puts them in B tier because not having less enemies significantly boosts your strength. I don't have a whole lot to say about Tunis. Good navy, decent starting position. You got to watch out with the Italians because if you take Sicily, you know they're coming for you. Um, and you also got to make sure that you don't death war against Morocco or Iberia, Portugal and Spain, Castile. They will come and absolutely annihilate you. Teutons. Teutons are crap. Teutons have great ideas. You got discipline, infantry combat ability. You get a bunch of really, really nice events. Very flavorful country. However, I'm not the biggest fan of the monastic order. I should also just probably say that this is subjective. So this is not necessarily the absolute meta, but and this certainly has some of my own opinion mixed in here. But for the Teutons' problem is everyone wants their land. Everyone. You got Brandenburg to the west. You have Poland to the south. Um, Sometimes you even have a Livonian Order player. Sweden, Denmark, Muscovy. It's a problem. Their diplomacy is horrible. So their amazing ideas can't save it from its fate. I wish I could put them higher because they are a cool little flavor nation. In single player, they're fun, go in the Holy Horde. But in a multiplayer scenario, they're swamped with problems. They don't have very many expansion routes. I mean, besides getting like the Livonian Order as a vassal, which I believe happened in the Lions in the North DLC, you can't really expand quickly unless of course you're at the mercy of the Emperor and you join the HRE. Um, so they get F tier unfortunately. Maybe they'll get bumped up to E tier if I'm feeling sorry enough for them. Papal State. Papal State's interesting because they're kind of friends with everyone. Every game you usually see them allying France, Austria, and Spain. So they're very multilateral in terms of their diplomacy. Pretty decent ideas. Being the Pope and having less aggressive expansion is really, really nice. The minus tech cost, idea cost. You have discipline in your ideas. You get the Swiss mercenaries. You need government reform. You can always go Battle Pope. Pope's a pretty solid choice. I'd say it's definitely a B tier nation. I'd much rather play them than Brunswick, Ulm, or Aragon. I'd say they're better than Tunis. However, if I were to wager who would win in terms of a fight between the Venice player and the Pope, excuse me, I would say Venice would win. So not a whole lot to say about the Pope. They're fun, they're flavorful. However, I think that there are a couple better nations in Italy to contend in the region. Switzerland, Switzerland's fun. Switzerland's another B tier. I feel like we're gonna have quite a few B tiers. A lot of these nations are just kind of run-of-the-mill, medium. Uh, I'd probably put Switzerland here. Switzerland's great because of their mercenaries. Switzerland has wild mercenaries, especially if you take mercenary ideas. I've seen Switzerland players beat Austria and France, not together, but in separate wars. Just because their mercs have so much discipline and so much reserve manpower. You could be fighting a Switzerland that has 40,000 max manpower, but with all their mercs, they're at like 150,000. So they can be a real pain to fight, especially in those mountain provinces. They're kind of a support nation. You're never going to see them be number one GP unless they're just vulturing the nations around them that are losing wars. Um, so for that reason, I put them in B tier. Sweden, well, Sweden, everyone knows Sweden is not overpowered. Sweden is definitely an A tier, could be S tier. In terms of starting, that 20% infantry combat ability to start with is wild. Um, Combine that with a morale of armies or discipline advisor early game. If you're not doing diplomacy with the Denmark player, you can be sure that you'll be getting some stack wipes. Hire the free company with the minus 15% mercenary maintenance cost. Sweden is a contender. You see Sweden's fighting out completely outnumbered against Russia, Denmark, Poland, and sometimes they can bring it out. Great mission tree ever since domination. Really, really flavorful, a fun region to play in. You can become pretty rich with your copper mine. I believe it's Dalaskogan. Sorry to any Swedish viewers. I'm sure I mispronounced that, but Sweden's a really, really fun nation and can absolutely contend for number one GP by forming Scandinavia, which is an incredible tag. Perhaps if you guys would like to see me doing a tier list for formable nations, I could consider that. But in terms of these are mainly just starting nations, because you see I don't have Great Britain or Prussia or anything on there. I am taking into account your formables because and kind of the route that you're supposed to take as these nations. Sweden is really, really strong. This is Serbia. Um, Believe it or not, I have played quite a few games where the Serbia player is allowed. You might say, oh, that's kind of weird. Um, they get wiped off the map by the Ottomans right away. And you'd be correct. I don't know why Serbia has been allowed in quite a few games I've played. They can be a support to Hungary, with their gold mine. They can field 20, 25,000 men if they really want to indebt themselves, maybe 30, 35. Can certainly hurt the Ottomans a little bit, but once Ottomans hit Tech 5, Serbia is going to be in a world of pain. So I'd put them in C tier because if I reckon in a 1v1 they'd beat both Brunswick and Ulm early game, but then of course you have to consider what's their scaling potential, and they have none. So I'd probably put them in D. Yeah, let's move up to the Teutons. Savoy. Savoy's an interesting nation. I might get a little bit of flack for this, but I am not the largest fan of Savoy. Savoy has decent ideas. They're not super duper military focused. Much more about like the forts, construction cost, dev cost, building up Piedmont, that sort of thing. They're very role play ideas. I think you get some diplomatic bonuses in there as well. The main problem with Savoy, I feel like, is if you're going to get into an early war with either the Milan, God forbid you're going to fight the France early game, they have no economy. You're fighting in the mountains. I mean, half your provinces are mountains. I think the only provinces you have that aren't mountains right at the start It's that one Piedmontese Brescia, or Bresse, something like that. Um, you do have a path to form Sardinia Piedmont, which is amazing for the admin efficiency, and they get slightly buffed at ideas. However, um, they don't have a whole lot going for them other than they're formable. Plus, you have to potentially fight the Spain, because Spain's not going to just let you grab Sardinia, most of the time, anyways. And then, of course, you have to worry about countries around you that have better ideas militarily. So Milan's got the 10% infantry combat ability right off the bat, and they have either the military dictatorship government, and we'll cover that later. But for that reason, I put them in probably a high C tier. Not as good as Aragon, but definitely better than the Germans in terms of scalability. Honestly, I'd say Brunswick can probably scale better than Savoy if Savoy is having problems fighting the nations around them. Portugal. Portugal's a solid A. Potentially high B. We'll figure it out. But Portugal's just, everyone knows they're the colonizer. Shout out to Absolute Habibi. He plays Portugal really, 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 really well. Uh, they're definitely not a military quality nation. I believe they get a 10% infantry combat ability as their starter, and then they get a 10% artillery combat ability. So really, really lackluster in terms of military quality, but I think it's kind of made up for by the fact that you can just colonize so quickly. You can even have player colonies if you're playing in a big enough lobby. And you kind of are a little bit at the mercy of the Spain player, but every Spain player that knows what's good for him will keep your Portugal around, um, because Portugal's just going to bring more money to the Sevilla node than Spain can do all by itself, or at least faster, anyways. So Portugal's a really, really fun nation, totally colonial, very, very naval focused. I've seen Portugal's beat the British Navy from time to time, especially in the Domination DLC. They got their new ships, essentially light ships that have as many cannons as galleys, if I'm not mistaken. So they're slightly better, and they have a little bit more durability. The caravels, I don't know if it's caravels, it's something like that, but they have pretty solid navy. And their mercenaries are fun. Not mercenaries, they're marines. That's what it is. Poland is S tier. The only thing that I think would make Poland not the top nation in the game is their diplomacy. Poland has incredible, incredible ideas. I'd say they're much better than the PLC ideas, Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth. You get infantry combat ability, you get morale of armies, you get manpower, you get cav combat ability, you get discipline, you get goods produced. Poland is such an amazing nation. It has nobody it really has to fight at the start. You take I mean, the old meta used to be you take the 666 ruler. That's kind of fallen out. A lot of people don't allow that anymore. Um, so you just take the Lithuanian PU. Um, you have really strong mission tree. You can get personal unions on Hungary or Bohemia if they're not players. You're gonna have to fight Austria, but honestly, I'd say that Poland has a pretty solid chance of winning those early fights. The problem with Poland is everyone wants your land. You have a Russia, a Brandenburg, Sweden, Austria, even the Ottomans if you have Romania, um, or Crimea. You're just everyone's target. And despite the fact that you have such amazing ideas, it's kind of dampered by the fact that you are targeted by everybody. You can be friends with Austria and people pretty early game, but chances are people are going to be looking to fight you, to form Prussia, to gain Galicia, and then of course Russia just trying to gobble you all up. So definitely an S tier nation in terms of ideas, but their diplomacy sucks. Ottomans, another. I'm tempted to put them in either S or A tier because everyone they're an incredible nation, especially with their new mission tree that they got in Domination, the islets. You can make hilarious amounts of money. I've seen not even exploity things, but just you can just blob so incredibly quickly. Obviously, having those Turkish units early game um, really allows you to just smash people in your way. Your problem early game is going to be manpower, so really got to focus on mysticism. super solid ideas with the discipline early game. You got the manpower. So Ottomans is incredible, and you have that insane government reform. You can play tall. A lot of opportunity is the Ottomans. You can pretty much expand in any direction. Um, of course, you do have to deal with decadence after the Age of Reformation, but it's not impossible, and it's absolutely 100% able to weather the storm. You do got to be wary of strong Austrias and Russias that will come to dethrone you because, well, the auto blob is not everyone's friend. So Novgorod. Novgorod is over there with Serbia. They're better than Serbia. They're just a worse Muscovy. I've seen people play Novgorod. They say, "Oh, I'm playing tall Russia." It's their ideas are not very good. You get a cool government reform, the Vetch Republic, but they don't have a whole lot of stuff going for them. I believe they get some manpower and then they get some naval bonuses, some trade, dev cost, if I'm not mistaken. But that's not the style that you should be playing in Russia, anyways, in my opinion. So for that reason, they get D tier. Uh, Norway. Norway is, I'd say Norway is like a C tier. Really, really fun exile nation. So you just go full colonial and make your capital part of the New World. Either play Vinland, you can form the United States, Canada, any of those really cool formables. Texas, if you're trying to be really meta, because I believe Texas has the best ideas out of those North American nations. Norway's good fun. They are at the mercy, of course, uh, at Denmark and Sweden at the start. Most of the time, Norway is actually not allowed, but if you are playing in a game where Norway is allowed, that can be a little bit fun. Um, Pretty solid naval ideas. You do struggle with economy early game, but if you can pull off the successful um, transition to the new world, they can be a contender for sure in North America or South America, wherever you decide to go. Munster. Munster is one of the Italian tags in Southern Ireland that is pretty popular to form Ireland. However, forming Ireland is, I mean, shoot, with an England player, it's not going to be super successful unless you can find allies, and I don't really know anybody who's willing to just help destroy England right off the bat. So for that reason, I'd say they get like a D tier. I love Ireland. Ireland has cool ideas, really solid ideas. You know, sometimes you even see England players forming Ireland before they form Great Britain. Um, so they can complete all their missions, get some temporary bonuses, and sometimes they even keep the ideas, but that's not for me. Um, Super fun tag, super cool tag, especially in single player, but in multiplayer, they are usually just outclassed. Um, Unless, of course, you're Zlevik, and Zlevik can do some crazy stuff. Munich. Munich's great because you can form Bavaria. Bavaria is a solid tag, tall playing, um, economy focused. You're right next to Austria. You kind of get to see everything around you happen without having to worry about a whole lot of aggression. Uh, you will get the occasional aggressive Austria who just tries to destroy you right off the bat. So that's fun. I think that the main problem with Munich compared to Landshut, which is the other Bavarian tag, and I'll talk about them later, is their ruler. They just have a crappy ruler and a crappy heir as Munich. The only saving grace is the fact that they start with Passau as a vassal, which can help those early unification wars for Bavaria. But to be honest, I think that Landshut is just so much better. I'd put them probably D tier. No, I can't say that. I love Ulm, but I can't say that they're better than Novgorod and all these guys. No, they have better scalability. Maybe I should put Novgorod in C tier. There we go. Um, Muscovy. Muscovy is S tier because I'd actually argue that Muscovy is probably one of the best nations in the game. Muscovy straight into Russia, and it's mainly the fact that Muscovy is just the better Russia forming tag that I put them this high because Russia is where your going to explode in terms of quantity and quality, amazing government reforms, amazing mission tree. Russia is just a contender. If you don't deal with them early, they will bite you in the butt. Um, Muscovy has all the manpower. You're Orthodox. I mean, there's not a whole lot to say. Muscovy is incredible. Early game, they do suffer with manpower. They do have some enemies. They can be killed, but I think that they still deserve S tier because if you can survive it, then you're gonna become number one, uh, or at least top five, I'd say. Milan. Milan is my ideal Italian nation. I'd say that they're a solid B. Um, hmm. I'm tempted to put them in front of Venice because their diplomacy is much better uh, than Venice. However, Venice just has an incredible starting position on Milan. I'd say I'd put Milan above the Pope, but below Venice. I think that their unique government reforms are super duper fun, super flavorful. The fact that you can get those level 5 forts on the mountains is really really cool, just like Savoy slash Sardinia Piedmont. You have pretty solid ideas through and through. You really focus on infantry combat ability, so you're going to be wanting going quality and innovative ideas. They are, like I said, really, really tall focused. So when you're forming Italy, if I were to go through most of the Italian nations and I were to say, hey, which one do you think will be the tallest by the time they form Italy? And I would say it's either Milan or Florence. However, I think that Florence's start is a little bit more RNG focused, and I'll talk about that more later. Lubeck. Lubeck's fun. Lubeck can be a contender in North Germany just because their economy is better than Brandenburg. So sometimes you'll see death wars, or well, actually, you will see death wars between Lubeck and uh, and Brandenburg. Uh, you got to be really really careful as Brandenburg when you're going against Lubeck uh, because Lubeck has a much better starting eco. Um, the ability to really consolidate the Lubeck node with your trade league. You don't have amazing national ideas in terms of military. You do have a pretty solid mission tree ever since Lions of the North, but Lubeck suffers um, because having the Denmark player there, and then if you have a Cologne, uh, their early game bonuses of having a pretty solid economy diminish really quickly. So what they have to do is defeat their neighbors really fast, or they're done for. So sometimes you'll see Hanseatic leagues beat the Cologne or beat the Brandenburg, but then they die to the Denmark or the Cologne or anyone around them really. So you got to be real careful as Lubeck. They're definitely a fun nation, but their early eco is what puts them in B tier. Lithuania. Lithuania is a solid B. Depends on what mod you're playing in. Uh, Lithuania, I would say, is better than most of these nations. They have really, really good scalability. You can form Ruthenia as them. Starting with that 20% infantry combat ability, excuse me, cav combat ability, you can defeat the Russia player at Tech 8 really quickly because it gives that cav shock. And they can be friends with Poland. They can be friends with Austria, the North. They have pretty decent diplomacy. Their expansion, however, and the reason why they're not higher is because they're the wrong religion. So they're Catholic with majority Orthodox, which means you're not going to be getting the majority of your bonuses from Orthodox unless, of course, you grant autonomy, but that's not ideal. You can also just go Orthodox. I think that's the true play here is just Orthodox Lithuania. And then you form Ruthenia, or even the Lithuanian Polish Commonwealth, which is a unique formable, really cool. You can get that unique government reform. I believe it's the Grand Kingdom or the Grand Empire, something like that. Solid nation. Their scalability is hampered by their neighbors and the fact that they have to expand into players, um, which can be really, really hard on their lackluster economy. Landshut. Landshut's great. I would say Landshut is a solid B. I'm not. Maybe I'll have to go and adjust these a little bit more. Uh, yeah, right now we'll put them like right here. I think we'll bump up Switzerland up a little bit. Yeah, that looks about right. So Landshut's great. They have a really, really solid starting ruler, which allows them to play a tall Bavaria, which is really, really fun. Good diplomacy. You don't have people around you trying to kill you right away. I mean, unless I'm looking at you, Austria. But so long as you're cool with the Austria and you don't get a little big for your britches, I think that Landshut makes a pretty solid country to play as. And then of course Bavaria has pretty decent idea, cav combat ability, discipline. They're lacking morale, which is unfortunate, but overall Bavaria can certainly have some influence into southern Germany. I don't know about being number one great power, so you might have to swap to a different tag, but it's difficult because the only tag that you can form after you formed a German regional tag is Prussia, and I don't see Bavaria getting to Prussia really, really quickly. Holland, you know, I used to really, really like Holland, but everyone wants your land. This is another nation, kind of like the Teutonic Order. They have really solid ideas. They have fun events. They've got a great government. They're in an amazing trade node. They're able to dev. The two problems that Holland has into Netherlands is the fact that most people want your lands. You have to have a pretty friendly France or a friendly England to survive. Um, you got to get people to support your independence from Burgundy, unless you're playing a mod. Most of this is talking about vanilla or slightly modded, like the Gecko mods, um, and Holland just kind of has a rough go. It doesn't have a super duper amazing military either. They're mainly colonial, naval, um, and for that reason, I mean, they're kind of, they got to be put in C tier, unfortunately. I'd say that they have better scalability than most of these nations, probably a little bit better than Savoy, because if you can form the Netherlands, then you'll be pretty solid. But again, your military quality is just a real damper. I'd say they're probably the best of C tier. Hungary is an A tier. Hungary is great. Really, really, I'm a big believer that Hungary is a super duper devable nation. You have some really, really nice farmlands. You have in terms of ideas, you've got discipline, you've got manpower, you've got goods produced, you have dev cost. Excuse me, I don't know about dev cost, but I know that you have super devable lands, solid army, plenty of expansion routes. You can expand into Venice if you need to. Um, you can be an empire in your own right, even if there's an Austria. Um, and the ideal way to do that is to just be friends with the Austria and focus on building yourself up. You can have quite a few gold mines as Hungary, so early eco is fine. I'm a big fan of Hungary. I think the Black Army is super duper cool. There might be a little bit of a bias on this one, but they just have solid ideas. They're in a solid spot. Um, they can expand into their neighbors really quickly. You can even go Orthodox. I think that's ideal. Um, it's annoying, obviously, losing the extra crown land, but I mean, Hungary is definitely an A tier. I would say that Portugal stays a little higher because their colonial scalability is higher than Hungary's. Great Horde's B tier. Um, you'll see Great Hordes do better than Muscovy. It's really one of those things where you either have a Muscovy or you have a Great Horde. And most of the time the Muscovy will win, or sometimes you won't have a Great Horde player. But Great Horde, if you play your cards right with your extra shock early game and the fact that you're a Horde, you can defeat Muscovy and you can dominate the East. So for that reason, they're just a solid B tier nation. The fact that they can take on Russia is pretty cool, but it's just an early game thing. So you really got to press your advantage, or you will fall down the rest of the list. This is Georgia. Georgia is. I wish I could put Georgia up. Super flavorful nation, especially in the last DLC. Uh, it pains me to put them super duper low, just because I think they're really cool. But being in the mountains in the Caucasus, it sucks. And you have Persia, Ottomans, potentially a great horde Muscovy player. You're not going to have a whole lot of friends. Your dev ability is pretty slim. You really got to be stacking those modifiers if you want to have a a big enough army to even stand a chance against your neighbors. Um, and even their mission tree, while it's a good mission tree, it's just not as good as your neighbors. Persia is crazy, Ottomans is crazy, Russia is crazy. Um, it's just a regional power. Um, I guess if you can vulture, you can try and or gank your neighbors. You might be able to survive and make some sort of cool empire. But unfortunately, I'd say that they're probably the top of D tier. France, France and Russia. They are two of the contenders for the top spot, in my opinion. Um, I'll have to look these other nations over to see where they stand. But France is just incredible. They don't have a whole lot of threats right at the start. I mean, they get all their cores back if you do the Hundred Years' War peacefully, which I feel like most people should fighting the Hundred Years' War. I mean, if England loses one battle, it's over. Um, man, their scalability. They have super amazing land to dev, just like Poland, just like Hungary. So you can play super duper tall. Um, amazing army quality. The lessons of the great, uh, the Hundred Years' War. It used to be Elal with the 20% morale of armies. Now it's 15. I believe that they get the 20% with Revolutionary France. Uh, you can just beat up on all your neighbors. France can go colonial. They can go expand. You can go Crusader France. You can expand in North Africa. You can dominate your neighbors. You can cuck over the Italian players. You can be super duper friendly with everyone and just dev. France is a very, very versatile nation. You're going to have a solid economy. You're going to have one of the best armies in the game. France is incredible. And also an amazing mission tree with good government reforms and that sort of stuff. Florence. I would say Florence and Milan are about equal. Some people prefer Florence. Some people prefer Milan. Florence has definitely better mana generation at the start. Milan has to worry about their disaster, which can, be a pain if they are about to fight Venice or Savoy, or the Pope, or even Florence. But most of the time, I see Florence and Milan allying at least early game. Florence has solid ideas. You've got the 20% manpower. Later down in your ideas, you've got 5% discipline. You've got dev cost. Production efficiency, Florence is pretty darn solid. Super duper tall. You're gonna have great mana generation with your first leader. Might spawn Renaissance. I mean, most Italians can, actually all of them can, but um, I tend to see Florence getting it quite a bit. Florence is great, and this is just a personal preference. I just prefer Milan over Florence, but some people might put it above. Um, you just got to worry about the great powers coming for you. And Tunis raiding your coast. I'm looking at you, Tunis. England. If you would have asked me a couple of years ago where England stands, I would say they're the best. And to be honest, they might still be the best. However, just seeing, it's hard. I would say that England is still an S tier nation. Thinking scalability, yeah, I'd say they're better than Poland with their colonies. You can have an insane colonial empire. Your navy's gonna be unmatched eventually. Um, you can get beat early game if you're not careful. I'm looking at you, Denmark. Seeing a couple Denmarks just build a couple heavies combined with their Norwegian troops, defeating the England. You just gotta be laid back as England, and you can bring it out. I'd say their scalability is even better than Ottomans. I mean, if Ottomans are playing super aggressive and killing their neighbors, maybe not. I'd say they're probably number three. Their army is um, nothing to be super duper proud of. It's really just your navy. As Napoleon said, you guys are so proud just because you have boats, and it's true. The British Navy is what carries them to victory. Amazing colonial empire, great ideas, super duper tall. I don't even need to explain England too much. Denmark. Denmark's a great nation. Honestly, I'm gonna bump up Milan and Florence and Venice to A tier because they're all solid nations, and you're gonna be contending with the great powers. Um, Denmark. Denmark's an interesting one because Denmark gets to play quite a few different ways. You get to either go colonial, expand in Britain, expand in the Baltic, expand in Lubeck, expand in Scandinavia. You can play with PUs. If you have a Sweden player, you can be friends with Sweden, you can hate Sweden. There's a lot of different ways to play Denmark. Um, Forming Scandinavia as them is a little bit more difficult. Um, Chances are you're just going to be kind of playing Denmark-Norway with your navy, which is fine. It's good fun. Um, I don't see them winning a war against Sweden or England, at least on the land. Sweden or Denmark's a solid B tier. They're better than most of their neighbors, but when they really have to fight a great power, that's when things become tough. I'd say they're like the top of B tier. They're kind of near Lithuania. Cologne's kind of in the same group as these German miners. Um, they can form Westphalia. Westphalia is a great nation. They're definitely more secluded from their neighbors, so I mean I don't really see them fighting their neighbors right away. I guess you could say that about these other ones, but they have pretty solid ideas. Discipline right off the bat. You're a bishopric. You get those really cool gov reforms. I always see Cologne's doing really, really solid, either forming Hanover or Westphalia. Um, it might be a little bit of bias. I might just have to put them above most of these countries. I'd say they're probably around the Netherlands. They have pretty good scalability. Um, I just don't like Aragon. Brandenburg. Brandenburg's an A tier. Um, Simply put, their ability to form Prussia is what puts them in A tier. Starting with infantry combat ability and morale of armies is nice. Well, actually, those aren't your traditions, but your starting ideas, your first couple ideas, morale of armies, infantry combat ability, pretty solid. You're gonna be able to fight against your neighbors, Lubeck, Denmark, ideally not Sweden, because you'll probably get your ass handed to you. I would say that they have better scalability than. Well, it's not necessarily scalability. There's a lot of factors to look into this. If you have an Austria or a Poland that isn't going to let you form Prussia, then you're probably like a B tier. But if you have mellow friends and you do your diplomacy correct and you can somehow get that Prussia, then you're going to be propelled up to, S tier, purely on your military bonuses alone. The fact that Venice has so many enemies makes me want to put Brandenburg ahead of them. Same thing with these Italian nations. Not that because they have extra enemies, but just the fact that they can form Prussia. I'd say they got to be right here. And Prussia, of course, is an S tier nation, but these are starting nations. Brandenburg's really, really solid. Um, this isn't necessarily just their starting strength because Lithuania and Denmark and even Switzerland would probably beat Brandenburg at the start. But Brandenburg just has amazing scalability, and everyone knows Prussia is amazing. Burgundy. Ah, yes, Burgundy. Burgundy is a solid B. Um, Decent ideas. 15% morale of armies. Got your discipline, manpower, all your bread and butter. They can beat France in the Death War if they're careful or if they commit enough. Chances are they'll bankrupt right after. They're a fun nation. They're cool. You have the flavor with Lotharingia, but I mean, the only reason I'm putting them in B tier is not because their ideas are necessarily bad. It's just I usually see them dying to France, and that's a factor that needs to be taken into account. If your nation dies really, really quickly, your success rate is not very high, and therefore I don't think that we should put them in A or S tier. So Castile's an A. Could some people would say, oh well, they're like probably an early or a bottom S tier nation. Solid ideas, great economy, colonial, naval. I mean, they're a great power. Um, I'm gonna make some people angry with this. I like Sweden better than Castile. Um, Castile is solid. You got that 15% morale of armies and all the colonial buffs, missionaries, missionary strength. Um, if you can kill the Morocco player, which I did not put on here, but the Morocco would be like a B tier, probably like a mid B tier nation. Um, if you can beat the Morocco, expand into North Africa, make some puppets, you can. Spain can absolutely be the number one great power. With that said, do I normally see them be the number one great power? No, I'd see a Scandinavia be number one before I see a Spain personally. And then Austria. Austria is an early S tier. Just their personal unions, their mission tree, the fact that they start with 10% morale of armies, the HRE. Chances are, in multiplayer, you ain't gonna form the HRE. You can go decentralized. Your starting manpower and your 10% morale of armies in your traditions is what makes you super strong early game. You can snag those PUs, maybe grab a Burgundy, fight it out with France. Sometimes Austria wins. You know, Austria is a contender. However, in my opinion, they slowly become weaker and weaker throughout the game because everyone kind of gets their better ideas. So you really got to get yourself a strong start as Austria um, if you're going to be the number one great power. Fighting the Ottomans, potentially Poland, France, even Russia. If Russia gets really, really big, can be tough as Austria. But Austria's pretty diplomatic. I feel like they have a lot of enemies, but they can also be friends with a lot of people. Uh, yeah, so that's my tier list. I think that this pretty much sums up the strength of the majority of the nations. Um, there might be some super small little tweaks here. You can tell me in the comments, but I hope you enjoyed. If you guys want to see some other tier lists regarding Europa Universalis 4, feel free to let me know, and I'll see you out there in the multiplayer games.